A warm welcome to the Personal Data Protection Seminar 2023, organized by the Personal Data Protection Commission. My name is Harjit, and honor and privilege to be on stage as your MC. During the PDP week, we'll have the opportunity to learn from distinguished thought leaders from international organizations, think tanks, and community or practices to level up your data and protection capabilities, and to also network with like-minded community as well. The theme for this year is Powering Innovation with Trusted Data, which is aimed in harnessing the potential of trusted data to transform business in an increasingly data-driven world. To begin our program, it gives me great pleasure to invite our guest of honor, Mrs. Josephine, the Minister for Communications and Information, to deliver her opening remarks. Minister, please.
Good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I'm happy to join you for the launch of the Personal Data Protection Week 2023. For the first time since this event has been organized in 2013, we are joined by our colleagues from the national data protection authorities of all ASEAN member states. Your presence, individually and collectively, reflects the importance of data to our region's growing digital economy. It also says something about ASEAN's interest in developing data policies that help people and businesses. Therefore, I would like to extend an especially warm welcome to our ASEAN colleagues for making time to be here today. In the past year, AI has come to dominate the headlines and actually a lot of conversations. Much of the excitement is around how human-like and clever AI has become, with the ability to answer complex questions, compose essays, write code, or even produce amazing music, images, and videos. Equally, there are many concerns about AI-generated content, including how it can be misused for disinformation or criminal activities, like scams. Another question is whether AI-generated content contains biases or discriminate against certain groups. This could happen if the datasets used to train the AI models already contain such biases or discriminatory features. As a result of these concerns, AI governance is an urgent priority, which some countries are already taking steps to address, including Singapore. We introduced the Model AI Governance Framework in 2019. More recently, we set up a foundation to guide the development of AI Verify, a testing framework and software toolkit that has been open-sourced to help industries be more transparent about their AI. While we take steps to strengthen AI governance, we should also pay attention to how AI models are being developed. In many ways, the AI models produce results that are only as good as the training datasets used by the developers. The old saying, garbage in, garbage out, applies to AI too. This already assumes that data is accessible in the first place. And yet, we all know that the two preconditions for high-quality AI implementation, data access and quality, are not always met. One survey found that 38% of organizations faced challenges collecting data from multiple internal systems. This applies to the ASEAN region. 34% had problems with data quality. In some cases, this may be like a piano with a few missing keys, or an orchestra that has left out some instruments, or that some of the instruments are not properly tuned. You will still hear music, though it will probably not sound very good. However, if the data issues are more like missing or poorly made pillars of a building, the consequences could be more serious. If we want to see high-quality AI implementation in our digital economy, we will need to do more to help businesses in the region access and collate quality data. This is necessary if we hope to benefit from widespread AI innovations. At the same time, we must ensure that consumers' data are properly protected. Without proper data protection, people will not feel safe enough to fully participate in digital developments, nor will they support the greater use of data for AI and other innovations. But how we improve protection is important. Our aim should be to do so whilst allowing innovation to take place and learning how to marry these twin objectives more effectively over time. These considerations underpin Singapore's approach to data regulations, which I will say more about today. Quality data sets are easier to build once companies are clear on what data they can use, including personal data. Consumers also benefit when industry has clarity on how personal data can be applied to AI in a safe and trusted manner. I had announced in March that our Personal Data Protection Commission, the PDPC, would be launching advisory guidelines on the use of personal data in AI recommendation and decision systems. This is part of our wider effort to lay the groundwork for a trusted ecosystem for AI development and deployment. The PDPC has received useful feedback from a wide range of stakeholders during closed consultations. And I am pleased to share that the advisory guidelines will now progress to the stage of open consultation before being published. The advisory guidelines will provide businesses with more clarity on the use of personal data to train or develop AI models. To promote transparency, there will be guidance on explanations that should be provided before seeking consent from consumers who are providing personal data for use in an AI system to make recommendations, decisions, or predictions. The guidelines also encourage AI solution providers to support their clients in their compliance with the Personal Data Protection Act. This can include designing systems such that it is easy to extract information clients will need for providing their explanations. This advisory guideline applies to traditional AI systems used for recommendations and decision-making. The PDPC recognizes that new concerns arising from the use of personal data in generative AI will need further consideration. For instance, the use of publicly available personal data to train large models to produce synthetic media, or deepfakes. The PDPC is looking into these issues and thinking through whether further guidance should be provided under the Personal Data Protection Act. Another way for governments to help companies build up their data sets is through the use of technologies, privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs. PETs allow businesses to extract value from consumer data sets while ensuring that personal data is protected. Through facilitating data sharing, they can also help businesses develop useful data insights and AI systems. For instance, using PETs, banks can pool data and build AI models that are innovative in fraud detection, while protecting their customers' identity and financial information. IMDA actively encourages industry to adopt PETs. At PDP Week last year, I announced the launch of IMDA's PET Sandbox pilot. Through this pilot, participating businesses could access a panel of PET solution providers and a comprehensive suite of support, including grants to develop PET solutions and regulatory guidance. This sandbox has generated much interest. A range of use cases have been developed in partnership with industry across diverse sectors such as finance, e-commerce, media, and technology. One example is Zuellig Pharma, a major pharmaceuticals distribution firm with regional headquarters in Singapore. Joining the PET sandbox helped Zuellig Pharma understand how to use PETs in collaboration with regional data partners. Access to their partners' data have helped them derive more precise analytics around the movement of pharmaceutical products in Asia while complying with their regulatory obligations. The success of IMDA's PET sandbox has opened new ways for us to work with local and international partners. I'm glad to announce that IMDA and Google are jointly organizing and launching the PET Privacy Sandbox. They call it PETX Privacy Sandbox. This is Google's first partnership in Asia Pacific with a regulator to support industry in testing and adopting PETs. The PETX Privacy Sandbox will benefit both companies and consumers. Many companies in Singapore and the region will gain a safe space to pilot projects using PETs on a platform they already operate on. With the deprecation of third-party cookies, businesses can no longer rely on these to track consumers' behaviors through the browser and will need PETs as an alternative. Consumers will experience being served more relevant content without fearing that their personal data is compromised. This is, in fact, not the first collaboration we have with tech companies in the PET sandbox. We already have many companies, large and small, participating in the sandbox. IMDA is actively pursuing more of such collaborations. And through experimentation and testing, we strive to build a robust tech ecosystem. Another way to improve data access is through facilitating data sharing across borders. This enriches the pool of data companies can draw on and is generally welcome by businesses. However, there must be clarity on the regulations that determine when and how such cross-border data transfers are acceptable. There are certainly data sets which no country will be comfortable falling into foreign hands and which must be properly secured. This should, however, not prevent the movement of non-sensitive data that support business innovations. Singapore believes that clear and transparent guidelines on permissible cross-border data flows work better than a blunt application of data localization rules across the board. In this connection, we commend our neighbors such as Indonesia and Thailand for enacting progressive legislation to enable data transfers across borders. We can give these efforts a further boost at the regional level. ASEAN recognizes cross-border data flows as a strategic priority, and we have been working towards alignment through the development of robust and practical data transfer mechanisms. We have made good progress in some areas. For example, we introduced the ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance all the way back in 2016, which established developing regional data transfer mechanisms as a strategic priority. One such data transfer mechanism is the ASEAN Model Contractual Clauses, or MCCs, which provide a ready-to-use template to help businesses develop contracts in compliance with the regional regulatory requirements for transferring data. As a region, we have also worked to facilitate cross-border data flows between ASEAN and the EU to enhance companies' access to data. The joint guide to the ASEAN MCCs and EU standard contractual clauses identifies commonalities between the two sets of templates. This helps foster a common understanding and facilitates contractual negotiations on data transfers between ASEAN and EU business partners. Singapore will continue to work with our ASEAN and EU partners on the next stage of this project. We hope to steward this to fruition during our upcoming ADG Ministerial Chairmanship next year. To conclude, I thank everyone here for your interest and support for the safe and responsible use of data in developing the digital economy. The rise of AI underscores the value and importance of data. As regulators, we have a duty to ensure their proper protection and ethical use. Equally, we have an interest to ensure AI models are built with quality data. We can and should adopt a holistic approach to maximize the value of data as an enabler for the AI ecosystem. This will require an international and multi-stakeholder cooperation. The areas I touched on today, guidelines for the use of personal data in AI systems, PETs, and facilitating cross-border data flows, are some of the ways Singapore hopes to contribute to this evolving field and very important conversation. In the next few days, we look forward to exchanging ideas on these initiatives and more so that we can together take this important work forward. I wish everyone here an insightful and fruitful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest of honor will be taking her leave for another engagement. Please join me in thanking Minister Teo for gracing our event today. Thank you, Minister. Well, as mentioned when we start, ladies and gentlemen, the PDP Week is back where we get to learn from distinguished thought leaders from international organizations, think tanks, and community of practices to level up our data use and protection capabilities, and also network with like-minded community. While the theme for this year is Powering Innovation with Trusted Data, which is aimed at harnessing the potential of trusted data to transform your business in an increasingly data-driven world. Well, we're just about to begin with our first panel discussion of two that will be scheduled here today. And a good way for me to give you a preamble for the gateway for you to pose your burning questions will be the use of a QR code, which is now once again on the screen in the ballroom and also behind me as well. May we please encourage everyone to scan the QR code and post your burning question. Let us commence with our much anticipated first panel discussion for today, which will be on transforming your business with data or AI. While the panel will focus on data or AI as a quick way to unlock the potential of data in new innovative ways, our sterling panelists will discuss opportunities for secondary use of data to speed up the development of new products or services. Industry experts also shares on techniques to innovate with data or AI. It gives me great pleasure inviting our distinguished panelists on stage, starting firstly with Richard Koh, Chief Technology and Customer Success Lead Officer, Microsoft Singapore. Li Gang, Head of Data Science, Zopa AI. Anthony Chavez, Vice President of Privacy Sandbox, Google. Brian Tan, Group Chief Data Scientist, Caro. And the session will be moderated by Lee Wan-si, Director of Development of Data Driven Track, IMDA. Wan-si is the Director for Data Driven Track at the Infocom Middle Development Authority. And in the area of AI, her responsibilities includes driving Singapore's approach to AI governance, growing the trustworthy AI ecosystem in Singapore, and also collaborating with governments around the world to further the development on the responsible of AI. Before I hand the proceedings over to Wan-si, again, on the screens, the gateway for you to connect by posing your questions. And join me in giving our first panel of the day a big warm welcome, please. Thank you very much. Wan-si, morning is over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So nice to see so many of you here today, this rainy morning, safe and dry here in the ballroom. I'm really excited to be here this morning to be discussing with this wonderful group of panelists about using AI and data to innovate for businesses. And of course, the discussion will involve all of you. So remember to post your questions on the pigeonhole through the QR code. So before I start, I thought maybe I could invite each of the gentlemen here to do a very quick introduction about themselves and their work, their organizations, maybe the food they like to eat, or maybe their last bit, you can decide what you want to say. And starting with Brian, and then Anthony, and then Li Kang and Richard. Brian?
Okay, hi. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Brian. I'm from Caro. So Caro is a homegrown unicorn that actually looks at automotive businesses across the whole region, including Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. Personally, I also head Indonesia operation as well. So it's very interesting when we look at data. We look at data to create models that is useful for us to penetrate markets, to get traction, as well as to provide better value services for our customers. So we will continue more about this discussion later. Anthony?
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Anthony Chavez. I lead the Privacy Sandbox initiative at Google. It's really great to be here with all of you this morning. At a very high level, Privacy Sandbox is focused on improving people's privacy online while ensuring that the web and the internet remains open and accessible to everyone. And we do this through development of new privacy-enhancing technologies in our browser and mobile operating system, which I know we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And very excited by the minister's announcement of the partnership with the IMDA. Just happened now. So yeah, great to be here and look forward to a good conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Li Kang from Zopa AI. So I head the data science team over there. And what we do is we use AI in HR recruitment systems to help companies to hire the best candidates while minimizing the bias and discrimination that usually comes along with these processes. Some of the examples things that we do is like using AI to automate, to pre-screen candidates by scoring and ranking them, automated interviews, right, and also like recommending questions for interviews and screening that is hyper-personalized for each candidate based on the job description.
Okay. Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Richard Koh. I'm both the Chief Technology Officer as well as the Customer Success Lead here in Microsoft Singapore. So today I'm talking to you as the CTO, not so much on the Customer Success Lead part of it. But really excited to be here. Thank you IMD and PDPC for inviting Microsoft here. It's certainly an exciting time. I think when you have heard Minister Josephine talked about the rise of AI itself, I'm sure that the last 6 to 8 months, a lot of the developments around, for example, ChatGPT has captured a lot of people's imagination. I think there's huge potential, and I'm really looking forward to these conversations that we have around data protection, privacy enhancing technologies itself, and all the collaboration across the industry that we're going to have. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to take you up on that regarding the ChatGPT and Gen AI and how that can protect privacy. That will be an interesting topic for everyone here. But before that, I thought maybe we can hear a little bit more from Anthony. I mean, you mentioned, right, Minister announcing the collaboration that we have. Could you just share a little bit more details on that? How can businesses participate, for example, and why that is important for Google?
Absolutely. So let me maybe start with sort of like a little bit of big picture on how we think about Privacy Sandbox. So as I think as we all know, right, the internet is this incredible resource that all of us use every day, incredible resource for society and huge number of benefits. I think what's become clear over the past several years, though, is that we need to evolve how user privacy works on the web and on the internet. And I think specifically, we need to address the challenge that exists today of the ability using what I'll describe as legacy technologies, like third-party cookies, as the minister touched on, to be able to track user activities across websites. And so at the same time, what's also clear is that we need to ensure that businesses that rely upon the internet and the web today have the tools they need to be successful across a broad range of use cases, which includes obviously digital advertising, but many other use cases as well. So the way we're tackling this with Privacy Sandbox is by developing new platform technologies, again, into our web browser Chrome and mobile operating system Android, that are fundamentally more private than legacy technologies like third-party cookies, but also provide effective building blocks that businesses and companies and marketers can build on top of and innovate and support all of these important use cases that really power and keep the internet free and open. And so, the way we're doing this is by, applying innovations and advances in privacy-enhancing technologies and PETs, as the minister has called it, and they're often described. And really, we think it's through technical innovation that we can tackle this problem and achieve, the goals, both goals that are important to us, which is improving user privacy online, keeping users' data safer, but also supporting, the industry and the ecosystem. And so, with the partnership that was announced this morning with IMDA, we're very excited by the opportunity to work with, companies based in Singapore and across the region on evaluating, adopting these new technologies, providing feedback to us, which will help shape how they evolve moving forward. So we really welcome everyone here in your organizations to take a look at Privacy Sandbox if you haven't already, and consider participating in the PET X Privacy Sandbox efforts and program as well.
Yeah, that's quite a mouthful. PET X Privacy Sandbox, but I hope all of you can remember.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, hard to remember. Yeah.
But I thought maybe before we leave this topic, because I think we have some businesses in the US, for example, who has already been trialing this technology, right? Participating in Google's Privacy Sandbox. Could you share some of their experience? What are some of the use cases that have come through the sandbox, for example? Yep. Maybe this will inspire our audience to participate here in Singapore as well.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. I maybe share a couple of things. So I think transitioning the web away from legacy technologies like third-party cookies, and I think maybe folks know these technologies have been around for decades at this point, right? 2 or 3 decades. So they're very established and heavily adopted. Making this type of shift to a more private internet, more private web, it's a really big undertaking. And we believe this is something that has to be done in collaboration, in partnership with stakeholders from across the ecosystem, companies and regulators and all sorts of organizations. And so we've been working closely with a number of companies across the industry, with many companies across the industry for several years now. Their feedback has really shaped how these new platform technologies work, and will continue to have a very, very collaborative approach. You mentioned what are some of the interesting areas and some of the use cases. As I touched on, certainly digital advertising and how can we support publishers in ensuring that their content can be accessible and available to everyone. How do we support marketers and businesses in reaching new customers and growing their business? That's an important set of use cases. But there's many others as well too. And one important area I would call out is around how do we ensure that the ecosystem and the industry has the tools needed to keep users safe online as well too. So even while we transition away from these legacy technologies and improve user privacy, we want to make sure that we can support these very, very important use cases for the industry and for consumers as well.
Maybe we'll get some really interesting use cases here in Singapore that we can try, right? And showcase right, through the sandbox. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe one more question on this. For consumers, what can they expect?
Yeah, so I think I think all of us here are really consumers of the internet. I'm sure we all spend a lot of time online, on our phones, in mobile apps. I think what to expect and really why we're doing this is, we think people want to enjoy access to the wide range of content and services that are available online today. And at the same time, they want to know that their data is protected, that their activities aren't being tracked by different parties across websites and across apps. And so that's what we're doing as we develop Privacy Sandbox and work to phase out legacy technologies like third-party cookies. I think an important actually area for Privacy Sandbox and potentially pets as well too is providing users with better, more meaningful controls over how their data is used for certain experiences online. And I think an area that we've been working on with Privacy Sandbox is how to give users better control over their digital advertising experiences in a privacy-safe way, but also ensure that they have the right meaningful controls over how their data is used.
Thanks for that. And then speaking of online platforms, maybe I'll come to Caro, okay. Brian.
Yes.
Users use your platform to buy cars and so on. And you mentioned earlier that you collect data and use that effectively to deliver your services to your customers. Maybe you can share a little bit of that more, some details about how that's done, as well as then how do you build trust, right, with your online users? Just like Anthony was talking about building trust with consumers on Chrome and on Android, but for Caro, what do you do? Thanks.
Okay. All right. So basically, Caro, our business model really we transcend the whole vertical of car ownership and usage. So we have the retail arm, which we do buy and sell of cars. We have finance arm that finance vehicles. We have insurance, and then of course after sales and so on and so forth, right? So this whole funnel, and sometimes the data that we collect from our customer can be useful in facilitating transaction. So I look at it typically as when we collect a data point. So this data point will facilitate, transaction, and each transaction will facilitate more data point, and so on and so forth. So there's this whole chain effect that actually occurs, right? So I give an example. Let's say, for example, when a consumer purchases a car. So typically in Singapore, right, when you purchase a car, then you typically start your insurance on the car, motor insurance. So I will also know when you're going to need to renew your insurance, right? So all these are data points. So when you need to renew your insurance next year, I will then approach you and target you and and you get more traction in getting business. So that's how we look at data. Every single data point helps us to get more transaction happening. And of course, I say I know when you buy a car, I also know when you're going to do a servicing, right? Typically, 10,000, 20,000 kilometers. And so all of this ties in together. When there are data, we need to be able to, to make full use of it, make every data point counts. So that's how I look at, startup like us. We tend to monetize and maximize every single data point that we get access to. Of course, in doing so, we collect data in many innovative ways. For example, in the past, motor insurance tends to be on an annual premium basis, right? So we also do motor insurance on a per mileage or per kilometer or driving pattern basis as well. So, if I know your driving pattern, then then there's some things that I need to protect as well. There's the data that you probably don't want people to know where you're driving to, when you're driving to, who you're driving to, and so on and so forth, right? So these are the stuff that we also need to ensure that as we go forward to use the data to maximize transaction, we also use the data responsibly so that we do not, have any issues with abuse of personal data. So that's very important as well. So we're very mindful of that. This is also true, particularly in countries like Indonesia, where Indonesia itself, we gain access to huge data sets because the population is much larger, about 280 million. So this actually forms a very good test bed for us to build models that can be applied to other regions as well within the Indonesia itself to maximize the services that we can provide to customer, be it after sales, be it insurance, refinancing, etc. So these are things that we're looking at as well in the company. Yeah.
Since you're talking about Singapore and Indonesia, are there any differences in how then do you handle the data and manage the data in these two regions or these two countries?
Interesting. Yes. Yeah, there are differences in the way we collect data. Given the different infrastructure that's prevalent in the different countries, so collection of data tend to be slightly manual in Indonesia. But that being said, quality data is also highly available there as well. Because with data itself, data quality depends on number one, how much you collect, what are the parameters, and number two is the data set, how large it is. So we tend to collect very good driving quality data in Indonesia, given that when the drivers go out, they travel large distances, they travel to different locality, etc. So I'll give some perspective itself. In Indonesia, we run a fleet business. There are about 15,000 vehicles. So this allows us great data points. Where do they refuel? Where's a good point to put charging station, etc. So this is also part of our approach as we look at new business unit, including things that involve ESG in terms of charging, etc. So this also help us, use data more in more innovative manner. So I would say, yeah, Indonesia data pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear. I'm sure our friends from Indonesia who are here will also be interested to hear more about how Kara collect and use the data effectively to drive value for your consumers.
That's right. Thank you.
But maybe we can just go over to another startup and also who is also collecting a lot of data or using a lot of data effectively. So Lee Kang, I'm coming to you from Zopa. Maybe can you share a little bit about how you use data? I suppose not just about the use, but also how then do you protect the data, ensure that you build trust, right, in the use of your services, and how does that fit into the broader discussion around AI and AI governance?
Okay, thank you, Ansi. So over at Zopa, right, we deal a lot with job applicants, jobs, right? These are very sensitive data, especially like candidates. When you submit a resume, you go through the whole recruitment process, you actually provide the potential employer a lot of this sensitive data. So let me give an example of, maybe I'll illustrate one of our features and then how we actually kind of determine what are the data, how do we protect the data so that the privacy of the person is still kind of protected, while we are still also be able to operate using AI to actually benefit both parties. So one of the commonly used feature that we have is when a candidate applies to a job, right? They can have 100, they get a few thousands applying to multiple jobs. One of the key pain points of recruiters is they have to screen through those resumes, see who are kind of suitable for the job, who are not suitable. And this typically because there's such a large volume of candidates applying. So the recruiters typically, they actually spend a very, very little time on it. So through this process, there's a lot of bias that actually occurs as well, unknowingly. So one of our features is how we do is we take the resume, the CV of the candidate, we look through all their information such as their education, their work experience, their skill sets, previously their work experience in what industry, what job function they are, and then look back at the job description, what is the requirements of the job, and then do a match. We use this using AI. However, to go through all of this, right, some of them, for example, more personal information, such as their name, their gender, protected attributes. So from the outset, to prevent this from influencing the model, we kind of anonymize and remove these data sets, right? And you also provide some sort of level of aggregation, so that instead of very granular, we're actually working with more kind of higher level features. So with this and putting into the model, right, then we can generate the outcome. We can see what's the match. Oh, this person's got maybe, it's a 70% fit. It's a good fit for the role. But after that, we also look at the outcomes, because sometimes in the way people write, they might also infer certain kind of their gender, for examples, like males and females, right, men and women, we write differently in terms of our CV. So we also look at the outcomes, then we compare it against, right, we do looking at similar groups of people just in terms of different attributes, and then compare, is there any difference in the outcome? So we do a lot of this rigorous testing as well to ensure that none of the bias is actually from the data that we should not use, okay, is actually influencing the outcome. Right? That's just one of the examples how we actually kind of differentiate the data, distinguish data, anonymize and remove parts, and then throughout the entire process, analyze the impact it has towards the output. And then from there, if there's any bias that's identified, right, we trace back all the way through the model, through the process, all the way to the data, and then make the decision, is this affecting? If yes, then should we remove them? Should we change them? And make these amendments.
That's very interesting, because what you're saying is you're able to check for bias without actually including the protected attributes, like let's say gender, age, and so on. By just looking at the similar kind of patterns within the data set. Could you share a little bit more? Because I thought that would be very difficult to do, to check for bias when you do not understand that where these segmentations are.
Yeah. Okay, so on that, right, for example, using this particular example of checking, let's say, whether there's any kind of influence on the gender attributes, okay, whether it's a male or female, would affect kind of the outcomes. So I think in this case, in the training of the model, we do not use any of those, right? So, but when we do the testing, this is where it comes in, right? We actually collected those.
Okay.
So we usually seek explicit consent to the candidates when they are applying, say, we are collecting this, some of your protected attributes, for the purpose of actually testing to ensure there's no bias. And this information comes in and you only use to actually ensure the model. Right? While this information is in as well, same, no personal data, right? There's no name you can attribute to any single person. So we tag to the anonymized data, we compare it against the outcome. So that's how we do. So we only use it at the testing side of things, not as part of the main model that will be driving and generating the outputs.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful, because I think, so we recognize that one, in developing your model, you can try to anonymize the data, at least remove the protected attributes, right? But in testing the model, you will still need some of these attributes in order to validate that there is no bias. But at the same time, to be able to collect this data, you have to then make sure that you go through that process of seeking consent, ensuring that data protection measures are in place. Right? So maybe we can then now ask Richard, from Microsoft's perspective, right? In terms of using data to develop AI, what are some of the considerations? I mean, Li Kang talked a little bit about, thinking about bias and thinking about how does he address data protection in that process. But from Microsoft, from your products, from your services, as well as maybe from your customers' own experience of implementing, how is this done?
Okay, it's a great question, Wansi. I think our journey with use of AI and across data to reason over, let's say, a large data set and be able to make the necessary considerations, as you said. I think, it kind of started back in 2016 when our CEO, Satya Nadella, penned an article in Slate where he talks about the responsible AI principles itself. And I think that was really seminal in the sense when we think about fairness, inclusivity, privacy and security, reliability and safety, resting on the foundation of transparency and accountability. Those principles have pretty much guide us when we think about how we would be developing our technology, how we would be having the kind of tools and governance processes within the company, how we would also collaborate with the industry as well. sharing some of our experiences. We don't believe that we'll always get it right. It's important that we share it and we learn from others as well. And it's very fortunate for us here in Singapore. Back in that time, I was able to work with IMDA and PDPC to have our colleagues represented at the Advisory Council for the Responsible Use of Data and AI itself. So I think over this period of time, we have developed some of that maturity. And when you think about I think about this as the steam engine moment of AI itself, where we saw the technology just took a massive shift in terms of its capability. What we said was some of these principles have helped to guide us a lot along the way to be able to bring that into the technologies and then be able to package that and afford that to our customers as well. So I think those kind of considerations, as you think about the principles, really thinking about the tools, thinking about the governance and the processes itself, but not only within the company, but also across the industries and your partners and your customers as well. I think sharing that and listening to the industry as well, and also brought across, let's say, a certain region, a certain set of countries where we are thinking about harmonizing some of these regulatory requirements itself. I think it's a great thing that needs to happen. So I would really encourage a lot of the companies to really challenge each other as well as ourselves, being the technology provider, to think about some of these considerations when we're adopting technology like this generative AI and just amassing a huge number of data or a huge amount of data to be able to generate and bring about new economic growth itself.
Thanks, Richard. First of all, thanks for the partnership with Microsoft over the years. I think that's really been helpful to us in terms of thinking about what we need to put in place, right, from an AI governance perspective. But since you brought up generative AI, I'm just going to start that question here now, and then we'll come back to talk a little bit more about data and some of the other aspects of PETs, for example. But generative AI, so what do you think? Minister mentioned a little bit about that and the concern around use of data, especially personal data. So from Microsoft's perspective, how are you addressing those concerns?
Okay, it's great. I think the concerns are all very valid today. But what I want to do is kind of put a mental picture into everybody's head right now. It is such a great time right now in terms of the advancements of technology. And at the same time, we are having these conversations around regulations, around concerns, around perhaps guidelines, advisories, and all of that, together with the development of the technology. If I were to go back a couple of decades or maybe a century or so, at the steam engine point in time, if we had done that and think about that and the impact to the climate, would we be here, right? So I think when I think about the moment itself, I think this is great because what we're really thinking about is the responsible use of it. The civilization's expectation of how we would be using the data itself. I think in many different countries we're all influenced by, let's say, different culture and upbringing, but there's a certain kind of basic human expectation of how our data would be used and how it would be utilized itself. And those are the kind of things that is, I would say, not replaceable by machines, if you will. I think while generative AI has been really fascinating, I think I was just listening to a podcast about some of our research scientists when they were trialing GPT-4 itself and solving some of those puzzles, which is some demonstration of science of intelligence, but we'll leave it to the research scientists to define on that. But I think this is the kind of moment where these kind of conversations are important. While the technologies are evolving, I think the regulators, the industries, the customers, the partners, all of us will need to have these discussions and at the same time develop and enhance, as well as say, what are some of the regulations that perhaps in the past needs to be, I would say, modernized, if you will. What are some of those things that perhaps we should think about the potential harm that it can bring to, let's say, society itself if this technology is not used appropriately. and appropriately can be defined in many societies differently as well. So I think having that kind of conversations within the country, within the society, communities is absolutely important.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think here in Singapore we'll definitely be very keen to hear from the community, to hear from our businesses, what are the things that we need to do to build trust with generative AI. Since I'm the moderator, I should take this opportunity to just do a short plug here. So IMDA published a discussion paper, so it's a discussion paper, we'll love to hear from everyone, on building trust with generative AI. You can Google that and then hopefully be able to download that and have a read and then give us some feedback. Now coming back to the panel, after my short plug, we talked a little bit about AI and how data is important and how then we have been looking at different ways in which we have been protecting the data. But maybe we can talk a little bit more now about the intersection, for example, of using data for AI and how technologies like PETs can be helpful. So maybe Anthony, you can share a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for the question. I think what we see, I think AI is an amazing example of this, but I think it applies sort of broadly that there's a need to balance and think about the right balance around, let's say innovation. Innovation is powered by data. AI is one example, but there's many, many other examples as well too, with user privacy, right? And how do we ensure that we find the right, the right balance between those two things? Because sometimes there is tension, right? I think you talked about generative AI, incredibly powerful, but also you can clearly see the risks and the downsides and the potential harms, and I think that exists in sort of some of the spaces we're operating in with sort of data and innovation. A couple of thoughts I would share. I think, one is clearly, there's a need for, principled thinking. I think one is recognizing the tensions and sort of the need to consider, right, the benefits, let's say to industry and to even consumers, but also the potential risks and harms too. I know for Google, we think a lot about, we have a set of privacy principles around artificial intelligence and AI. We have a set of principles that we put forth around how to think about finding the right balance and how to approach the space in a responsible way. So clearly that's important. I very much agree with Richard. I think this needs to be a dialogue across the ecosystem. And I think, as you said, we won't get everything right, but we need to be open-minded, learn new things, and continue to evolve it. I think the other thing I would say, and this maybe ties in with the privacy-enhancing technologies and kind of my world of privacy sandbox and sort of online privacy, I think at times there's, it may feel like there's a core, I'll call it a core tension or fundamental tension between sort of innovation or applications powered by data and privacy. For example, with sort of some of the legacy platform technologies that I've talked about and we've touched on, third-party cookies, I think it can feel like, well, clearly they enable important use cases for the industry, but they also enable basically user activities to be tracked across websites and apps, and so they're sort of a core tension. These things feel like at odds. Like how do we balance it? The thing I would put forth, and again, I think this is the really exciting aspect of PETs and privacy-enhancing technologies is, I think it's through the use of actually new technology innovation that we can sort of change the trade-off space, if you will, right? I think it's not inevitable that use of data for digital advertising needs to come with the risks and the downsides that exist today. With the current legacy technologies, those trade-offs exist and those sort of downsides exist. But I think by applying technical innovation to the problem space, we can actually shift what's possible. And again, I think panelists have talked about many examples of how we can use data in powerful ways, in really innovative ways, but in a way that doesn't have some of the potential risks and harms that can come with some of the legacy approaches. So we just put that forth, and I think we certainly think about Privacy Sandbox, for our browser and mobile operating systems as an important innovation and direction we're going to sort of change what's possible around the trade-off between innovation and privacy.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm looking at the questions now. So thanks everyone for submitting your questions and voting. Actually, the one with the highest vote at this point in time is the question around third-party cookies and PETs. And the question is really about could we simplify that change for the users or for the audience here today? Maybe we can share one API from the Privacy Sandbox and then take the audience through that process of how does that work without third-party cookies. What does it mean for a business?
No, thanks for the question. I'll pick one example. I won't go through all the use cases because it would probably take too long. So So I'll sort of describe how maybe this use case works today, and I realize many in the audience may already be familiar, but just in case. So I think an important use case for the industry is showing relevant digital ads or online ads to users, right? Ads that are actually relevant to things that you might be interested in, like I'm interested in travel or sports or shopping or other things. Historically, the way that this has been done using third-party cookies is by basically collecting a profile or a log, if you will, of all the different websites that a user might have visited, and then basically processing that information to determine what a user might be interested in. So while this can be an effective approach at determining or estimating a user's interests, it comes with the risk of different companies have a pretty detailed list of websites that you've been at, right, which is the privacy challenge that we're concerned about. So how do we solve this with a privacy sandbox or a PET, a privacy enhancing technology style approach? Sometimes people ask me, how is that even possible, right, if you can't track a user's activity across websites? So one example, this is just one of the technologies that we've built into Privacy Sandbox. We have something called, it's named the Topics API, or Application Programming Interface. And instead of having companies be able to collect a user's detailed website activities and then determine their interests, instead the browser will use and keep this data kept locally on the user's browser, will basically be able to infer high-level, broad things that a user might be interested in. Like it might determine that I'm interested in sports or travel, but that data is all kept locally and securely and safely on my web browser. And what's shared with companies to show relevant ads is actually just that I'm interested in sports, not a individual level information about all the websites and apps that I've seen. I'm kind of giving a simple example, simplifying the technical details. And there's other sort of similar examples I could give around digital advertising or other spaces. But hopefully that gives maybe the audience a sense of sort of how we're changing the approach to processing data, having the platform, in this case the web browser, take a different role and different responsibility to do so in a more private way, but yet still support what we think is a really important use case for the industry.
Thanks, Anthony. I hope that has answered the question in terms of clarifying what happens when there are no longer third-party cookies, and then how can tools like PETs help. I'm going to go on to the next question that has the most votes. And I think this is not really a good question for any of the panelists, but I'll ask it anyway. And this one I'll ask Richard, so Richard, pay attention. Right?
Okay.
So given the power of generative AI, what are we doing to minimize the misuse of it by bad actors?
Minimize the
Misuse
of it by bad actors.
Okay.
That's a great question. I think this is top of mind for many organizations who are looking to use generative AI capabilities itself. So, for example, what we do on the Microsoft Azure OpenAI service itself is we built in a whole bunch of guardrails that's embedded within the service itself. So things like content filtering, things like any detection for misuse itself. So the way we think about it is that how do we be able to, let's say, unleash the innovation around these technologies, but at the same time collaborating with the industry, with our customers and our partners, as we build in some of these guardrails to, let's say, minimize the misuse of these generative AI capabilities itself. You'll see it when you use the services. I think you probably see it. Zopra is one of our customers, so it's really great to have one of them here. But I think, you know what? I always think about this way as well. The human creativity is unlimited, and there are many ways that unfortunately, sometimes the dark side of the human race will exploit, let's say, for example, certain, let's say, loopholes, weaknesses, or things like that. And it's important that as a community, as an industry, that we are able to quickly surface some of this, so that just between, let's say, for example, the customers, partners, and the industry itself, we can all quickly collaborate to say, how do we address some of these potential loopholes as well? We cannot pretend that our technologies itself is ironclad and 100% guaranteed itself. One of the things is that really be able to, let's say, for example, allow our customers to report some of this potential misuse as well. And then when we come in and help the customers and say, okay, is there something that we can do in our technology? Is there something that we can do around processes itself? Or is there something that we can do in terms of training of the people itself? So I think when we think about how do we minimize this use, I think it's a combination. I think it starts with some of the guardrails that we built around the technology itself. But certainly, I think as we go on in the next 6 months, 12 months, I think we will see more and more of, let's say, for example, even potential misuse, and then be able to clamp down on that really quickly by identifying it, sharing it, how it's being done, and then be able to say, okay, how do we build that guardrails to, minimize all of that?
Maybe it's a way, in a way, it's similar to how we can address some of the cybersecurity concerns, right? Collectively, as a community, identify how these techniques, right, that people are using in cybersecurity, then can be shared with everybody else, and then putting in place the guardrails, putting in place technology to address that. And I think learning how people are using technology in these unsavory ways, I think is important. Nikang, you have something to say? Yes.
Yeah, maybe I want to chime in a bit from what Richard said as well, right? So I think just to share my thoughts from two different perspectives, one from the builders of the AI system, if you are developing kind of generative AI applications, and also from the company side. So I think one trick that can be used, right, like other than the guardrails, like Richard mentioned, because most of the time when we are building certain applications, there's a very specific use case. We will know what we want out of it, what it's supposed to perform. So with this, right, if you know the scope, this can be actually controlled more efficiently. You know what are probably the bad actors, what will they try to exploit, what you should not let the response to be. And you can actually build safety nets. Okay, so like you can put it before, or usually more typically at the end of the system. That means once you run, you send a prompt, it generates the output, it goes to this safety net, you then looks at what you are saying, what the query is, what is the response is, then you can set certain rules to say, this is not what in my scope, it's not in my use case, I don't want this kind of response. And then you can also effectively kind of filter out this. Of course, when you first put it down as a safety, kind of this safety layer, right, it doesn't really kind of capture everything, but as you get the feedback, like what Richard mentioned, you get feedback, the reports, you're able to enhance this. So overall, you are able to get kind of a more robust solution that is more kind of, that you can prevent to minimize this kind of bad actors. Then from the company perspective, let's say if you are not really kind of building these systems, so one way you can do is also, you can still use the same concept, right? So you send it in, send to a third party, okay, another model, external model, give you back the response. You can still set certain rules, safety nets to kind of filter this response. So I think that's one of the trick that we use in kind of when we're building our generative AI models, the applications, how we kind of moderate and prevent some of these bad actors.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikang, for giving a very specific example of how that can be done. I'm going on to the next question. This is for Brian. Yeah, so given that customer information is shared with various departments in Caro, right? How is the customer data protected?
Okay.
And maybe you can start with how is it used, right? When you share across different departments, then how do you protect it? Yeah.
Okay, so I wouldn't say the data is really shared between different departments. So it's interesting because in Caro, what we took an approach whereby all the data are centralized within the data science team, which is headed by me. So that means to say that the data science team will be the only one that aggregate the information, and only actionables will be then deployed to the department for execution. So basically, it's every single car that we buy or price in Asia is decided by my team. So so they only have to number, like, okay, so whenever a car comes in, just say, okay, this is the price to buy in, and that's the price to sell it at, and this is the margin we're going to make. Very small margin, of course. Yes, but these are things that we look at. So we try to centralize it because beside the fact that I think one important thing when it comes to AI, data itself, and even PDPA itself, actually we need human resource. We need talent to actually manage the data part of stuff, the PDPA part of stuff, and then talent is scarce. So typically you tend to centralize this talent within a group function. So that is the way I look at stuff going forward. Yeah.
So your department is very powerful.
No, our department works very hard. Works very hard.
But, I mean, speaking of talent, to analyze and use the data, right?
Yeah.
You also have talent to protect the data.
Yes.
Right? So I have a question here that talks about what can DPOs do to encourage the use of data. So DPOs are the data protection officers, right? So they're protecting, but how do they work then with your department who are using the data to do this effectively? Yeah.
That's a very good question. Actually, DPO are very important, which is why I believe the IMDA have a very good framework, when it comes to DPO training, certification, and what kind of skill set they need to have or need to be trained to have. So luckily for us, we take it very seriously. So we actually train some people, to make sure that data security, the framework, the people who are managing the data privacy are people who are trained to do so carefully and responsibly. So that's actually a very important role. That's a very important investment that I think companies have to make in the digital economy. This is an investment that will actually help to protect your customer rights, also protect your company as well. So I look at it as not only a service that actually gains traction for businesses, but also a service that's defensive, pretty much like how finance is defensive for country, for company itself. This is also how data protection is actually very important for defending a company trying to operate in the new digital economy, Web3, and going forward. Yes, so very important. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for also sharing IMDA's framework for DPOs and the training that we offer. I'm going to ask another question off the list. So again, thanks everyone for posting the questions as well as voting for these questions. So this one is about challenges for organizations. And I'll put it to Richard, right? What are the most common challenges that you encounter when speaking to companies that are undergoing digital transformation? So since you are I'm asking you to wear the customer success hat now.
Yeah, sure. I'll wear the other hat. I think a lot of times it's, let's say, as it relates to data, or maybe just digital transformation as a whole. I think the big part of it is, I would not talk about the technology nor, let's say, different functions of the areas itself, but actually there is a fundamental cultural change that needs to take place in some ways or another. And why I want to say that is because when the companies themselves really adopts a growth mindset around how they think about their transformation, how they think about their data, how they think about training and upskilling their workforce, how they think about engaging with their customers and their partners, I think really reframing that is a big part of that transformation itself. I think the tooling, the platforms, the technologies that are out there, they're abundant. And I think the choices are all of that there. But a lot of times when I talk to the executives, the C-suites, and what they think about transforming their businesses, especially with data and AI itself, I would always encourage them to take a step back and say, how is your company's culture and mindset around some of these changes that these technologies are going to bring? Startups like Caro or Zopa AI is going to bring to the industry itself. Some could be challenging your existing businesses, your existing way of doing things. And perhaps they become your partners as well. And in turn, actually challenges the HR function, for example, which traditionally may have a different way of, let's say, or maybe a current way of interviewing candidates and thinking about how do they source for potential candidates. And now you have a company that brings a technology and a way of really transforming that department itself. Can the whole company rally behind that and think about, wow, maybe that's a different way or different approach? So I would say that mindset is really kind of like that fundamental foundation to go at it first. Really when you then think about the rest of it, whether is it technologies, whether is it upskilling and all that, I think that growth mindset really helps to like supercharge that whole transformation that's required.
And how do you create that mindset for your customers.
How do you create that mindset? I think it starts at the very top. I firmly believe in that. I think having the benefit of being in Microsoft, both in the I'll call it the Steve Ballmer era, but and also with our CEO Satya Nadella over the last 9 years or so. I think what we really did was at the very top, it was a recognition that could the company cease to exist if we have stuck to our own ways and if we have stuck to our fixed mindset of being know-it-alls, so to speak. And recognizing that, hey, if we continue to do and think the way we used to do, then Microsoft will cease to exist and be relevant to any of our customers and partners. So I think it starts at the very top, and when that happens, and seeing the leaders walk the talk every single day in whatever you do, which is really refreshing for me as a career person, to see that after so many years, right, Satya still talks about our mission every day and what we do that ties back to our mission around empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I think it's not about us kind of getting it right. We think that we're just still on this journey. There are still things that we get wrong all the time. We still want to learn, and it's important that we share this journey. And when it comes back to the theme of this conference itself and this whole panel, I think that transformation itself, it's not only like around the technologies piece of it or the processes or the regulatory piece of it, but also it is human, right? Because you are talking about data that's associated with us, like candidates, their capabilities, things like that. Whether is it, sites that we visit, for example, cars that we drive, in terms of mileage and destination. So I think those are the considerations that we as humans need to really internalize. And when we do that, I think that transformation will have a good foundation to grow off from.
Thanks, Richard. So walking the talk and internalizing. So for all the leaders here, something to remember. The next question I think is for Lee Kang, right? I mean, we talk about making sure that it's relevant, right? Your mission is relevant. So for Zopal, the question here is, what's the greatest challenge you face in ensuring that your AI solution is fit for purpose?
Right, so one of the greatest challenges we face, right? I'll share a nice story, right? So before we went to a company, we actually rolled this out. So actually when the recruiters start using it, they look at the skills and, okay, how do I trust this system is just generating some numbers, right? This job is like that. How do I know this is really okay? And they still have to go through the process and looking through each of them. So I think one of the key challenges you face is mainly on the change management, how people, because at the end, the value you bring is how much they can utilize, whether they use it and really deliver the value at the end, right? Whether they are hiring better candidates, hiring more quickly, right? So when we then speak to them and understand what is the concerns and difficulties that they face. So I think one of them, the main thing is all about trust, right? So you come up with a number, I'm not sure how it works, right? I previously done it this way and I think it's pretty good. So then we deep dive with that, understand, how you actually did it, what are the things that you consider. So with that in mind, we went back and kind of redesign how our output of our AI is generated. Then we actually provide some breakdowns. Other than just giving a score, right? We heard from recruiters, they usually look around work experience, they look at their education, whether it matches, they look at their skills as well, and then we give like some detail, some transparency, right? In this candidate is good in terms of the skills, but perhaps in their past work experience, they may not have that much experience. They are maybe from another role. So we provide this kind of breakdown. And then we went back to the users and we test it. Is this better, or you prefer this? Would this help? What else would it help? So I think one of the key things that how we kind of address this is to really talk to the users and understand what is happening in their mind and try to minimize the kind of the difference between what the experience of the new solution compared to what they have been doing previously.
So there was a question about measurements of success, although it's for PETs, but maybe I'll just pose that question to Lee Kang. So how do you measure then success for your users in this case, based on the experience that we've gone through?
Right, success, I think there's two levels. One from an organizational level, usually you still look at the key one that drives mainly the ROI. Let's say time to hire, what's the time spent, what's your productivity in general, what's your time spent to screen, right? How many candidates, quality candidates are hiring? That's on the organizational level, but more on the user side of things. We also measure like how much do they use, how much people are actually relying. We look at based on the recommendations that we generate out from the AI. Whether do they follow, how much, right? And what are the feedback given as well. So we continuously also get feedback through the system for each of our outputs and see whether they concur or not. So we use this to measure in terms of users, whether there's still a difference in terms of experience. Are they really using it, right? Or the numbers is just very nice for them to show, but they still run their own process. So that's how we measure.
So clearly, success has to be relevant to the users, right? Yeah. And then coming then to the measurement of success, or PT, since it's in the list here. Yep. How do you think, Anthony, in terms of measurements of success, how do we decide that PT has been effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think how we think about sort of success and like how is Privacy Sandbox working? Obviously, we use different types of PETs, and are we deploying them effectively, and sort of how is that working? It's a very good question. I think as in many, I'll call it complex spaces, right, where we're basically working across a number of different considerations, right? End user, business, cost of change, time frame, regulatory considerations. I think there isn't, I would say, I don't think there's a single like metric that we can look at. And I think we also have to take sort of the near term and think about how these technologies could evolve as well. We have to sort of think about it moving forward. So I think the answer is it's maybe not a super simple, satisfying answer, but it's a complex set of considerations. I think certainly we're thinking about, privacy improvements over the current status quo. We think about what are the other alternatives that the ecosystem might transition to if we were just to take away, for example, or sunset third-party cookies, and then, well, there's other forms of tracking and maybe invasive approaches that could be adopted, so we have to think about that. We have to think about, and working with the industry and the ecosystem, look at how effective are these new solutions built on pets and other types of technologies. We have to look at the time frame. How long will it take for us to deploy these and for the industry to adopt them? So we're thinking about, I think, all of those, another one is, and actually, I think especially with this audience, want to sort of put this out there. I think the regulatory considerations are also incredibly important. I think, I know we haven't touched on it that much today, but I think how we should look at, I'll call it current regulations around data usage and processing from a perspective of pets, and should they be treated differently versus traditional forms of data processing, which are potentially more invasive and more harmful. I think we have to think about all of those. So I would say, I think for Privacy Sandbox, not a single simple answer, but I think it's a set of things that we need to be looking at holistically.
I mean, that's why we are partnering on the Privacy Sandbox, because we also want to consider what are the regulatory implications for pets as well.
Absolutely.
But maybe we don't have that much time, so maybe just a very quick question on the same topic. Then how do you see the ecosystem? I mean, we see what Google is doing about this. How do you see the rest of the ecosystem transiting to the world without cookies or third-party cookies?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Look, I think, pretty much every business, or most businesses, I shouldn't say 100%, but I think, most businesses today, nearly every business is an online, cares about online, the digital ecosystem, whether it's the web or app or both. So certainly, I think, the evolving consumer and societal expectations around data privacy online is something that impacts pretty much every company, probably every organization, not even just companies, every organization in this room cares about it. Google, we have a role, as, speaking for our platforms, Chrome and Android have an important role to play. But I think, this is an industry-wide thing. I think that the thing I would quickly call out is, I think, we think that different organizations, based on where you're at in the ecosystem, have an important role to play. For our platform, products, again, Chrome and Android, we think these platforms are, sort of have an important responsibility to support the ecosystem and transitioning to higher privacy, while also, again, providing businesses with the tools needed to keep the web and the internet open and accessible to everyone. So I think it's certainly a very broad broad space and broad thing. And again, I think the partnership with the IMDA, I think sort of reflects that, right? The need to bring together, a platform company in the form of Google in this case, working with companies across the industry to sort of tackle this problem collectively and work together collaboratively.
Yeah, thanks. Again, thanks for the partnership. And last question, we have about 3 minutes left for all of you. So there's one question here that talks about how can businesses effectively utilize data and AI technologies to transform their operations and drive innovation? Lots of votes for this question. But what I ask for each of you is maybe just one takeaway to answer this question, starting with Brian, Anthony, and then Lee Kang and Richard. Yeah.
I think today there's some recurring theme about trust and about people. I think where I would say a takeaway would be, look at innovation, look at transformation itself. Actually, it all starts from the people, and for people itself, they need to be, entrusted and also empowered to innovate with the data that they are perceived to have. Yeah, that's very important. That's how I come from.
Yeah, I think I would just say leaning into the problem space and into the sort of challenges, the evolution, the opportunities that are ahead. I think I would say having working on Privacy Sandbox and talking with many companies and organizations across the industry, I think shifting away from what we've basically known and relied upon for decades is it's a hard thing to do, right? It's a hard challenge, but it's been super exciting, again, just working with a number of companies across the industry to see many of them leaning into the problem space and thinking about it not just as almost like, oh my goodness, I have to change, it's really expensive and it's going to be hard, but sort of as an opportunity to sort of maybe get ahead of the curve and really take a forward-looking perspective, and leaning into the problem, I think is would maybe be my one thing to call out.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be more like focus and be simpler, right? So I think a lot of times companies, they want to do everything and trying to find solutions for everything. But most of the case, I think focus on the core problems, the one that will actually drive the most ROI. Focus on that and try to find the simplest the solutions possible. So usually there's a wide range of solutions outside. So it's a matter of finding the right one, the simpler the better, that can actually deliver the results that you want.
Okay. Very short one, Wansi. We must be driven by data, not dogma.
Thanks, Richard. All very good advice. So everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists today for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Wansi. Well held. Wansi, gentlemen, may we please invite you to rise and pose for a series of photo opportunities, please. The first one, noble and smiling. Can we do a thumbs up? Thumbs up? Yeah? Okay. Join me giving them a big round of applause, please. And Wansi, well helped. Thank you so much. Everyone feeling okay? So far, so good? I was walking around the room and I think the general consensus is a little bit too cold. So we'll bring the conditioning to an optimal level for everyone. Will that be okay? No round of applause? Just okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. In time now, once again, in prepping for our second panel discussion, we'd like to flash a new QR code. So this is something a bit more different. It differs from the first QR code they've used for panel discussion 1. This is strictly and officially only for panel number 2. So it gives me great pleasure to tell you more about our second panel discussion titled Navigating the Complexities and Challenges of Data Transfers with Confidence, which focuses on international regulatory development of cross-border data transfers and the mechanisms in which organizations can leverage to transfer data around the world. Our distinguished panelists will discuss transfer mechanisms such as the global CBPR and PRP certification systems, its model or standard contractual clauses, and how governments and businesses can work together to build trust and interoperability in a global system. Gives me great privilege once again to invite our esteemed panelists to join us on stage, starting firstly with Raditya Kwashish. Raditya, welcome. Elaine Chu, Assistant Secretary of Asia DPO. Denise Wong, Deputy Commissioner of PDPC Singapore. Gladys Giraud, Head of Data Governance and Privacy Unit of OECD. And the session will be moderated by Yong Zi Kin, Chief Executive from Singapore Academy of Law. He is the Chief Executive, as mentioned, and is internationally recognized and expert on AI ethics, currently a member of the OECD Network of Experts on AI, a well-regarded expert on data privacy issues, and he has contributed to publications on legal issues relating to data privacy and spoken at many events. Zikin, it's always a pleasure to see you, sir. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, QR code on the screen for you to pose your burning questions for Zikin, and join me in giving our second panel a big warm welcome, please. Zikin, it's over to you, sir. Good morning.
Okay, thanks for staying back for this second panel. This panel has audience participation. So in line with that, can I ask all of us to stand up? Come. Let's all stand up. Let's all stand up. Audience participation. Let's all stand up, right? Yeah. I'm going to ask two questions, and depending on your answer, you either stay or you go. How many of us in this room purchase supplies for our businesses from someone based overseas? Please sit down.
Good. Shall we sit?
Now, how many of us, right, when we need to deliver our services, use a partner based overseas? Please sit down.
Okay.
Okay, for those who are still standing, this panel is not for you. Go for tea break. But jokes aside, please all sit down. And this panel is really about the movement of data across borders, right? We've heard the minister talk about the model contractual clauses, right? And it's really around a movement of data. And I am joined on this panel by some experts, right, who've got lots of experience handling some of these issues. And we can look forward to a good time of sharing of good practices, positive experiences, and what we can avoid. Now, I'll ask my panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with the gentleman at the furthest end, Kosasi. Please, could you tell us a bit about yourself? What do you do? And why are you here?
Thank you, Zigin. Hi, everyone. My name is Kosasi. I'm head of governance in GoTo Data Protection and Privacy Office. So if you don't know GoTo, maybe some of you know Gojek. So GoTo is the holding company of Gojek. So we merged with Tokopedia, and then we're becoming a GoTo group. So if you're familiar with maybe one of our services, GoCar, which probably the rainy morning like this is the perfect time to try our services. So maybe you know you probably one of our customer as well. So that's GoTo. And I'm also the co-founders of Indonesian Data Protection Practitioners Association, or APPDI. So happy to join this panel and share the stage with the wonderful panel. Hopefully we can discuss a very interesting topic, which is a complexity in data transfer, which GoTo has a business presence in 3 countries currently. Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam. So we also face the same challenges. So happy to share our experience with all of you today.
Thanks, Kusasi. And Elaine, tell us a bit about what you do and why are you here?
Sure. Thank you, Zikin. Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine. I am Assistant Secretary to Asia DPO. Asia DPO is a society created by practicing DPOs and other privacy practitioners. For DPOs and privacy practitioners, we aim to represent a unique and distinct, diverse voice in Asia for the privacy industry. In terms of membership, as mentioned, we are comprised of DPOs and data practitioners hailing from diverse backgrounds like law, tech, and also the business side. I have especially skin in this game in my second capacity as Group Data Protection Officer for Frasers Property Limited, which is a multinational company that has business assets across commercial, residential, retail, industry, logistics. So as you can see, being able to facilitate smooth data transfers is something that is very near and dear to heart.
Thanks, Elaine. And Denise, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming today. So I'm Denise, Deputy Commissioner of the PDPC. Took over the role from Zikin on the 1st of July. I'm still very new on the job. Prior to this, I've been a government lawyer for a long time. I joined the Infocom Media Development Authority about 2 years ago to look at digital regulations generally. I spent the last year working mostly in the online safety and anti-scam space. Thank you all for coming today, and we look forward to a really good time learning together.
Thanks. And Clarice, please tell us about what you're doing now and when was the last time you were here?
Okay, hi everybody, good morning. So you're not asking me why I'm here. You invited me, so I'm always very happy to be here. So joking aside, I'm the head of the Data Governance and Privacy Unit at the OECD since 22nd of August last year. So at the OECD, we run a number of projects, programs to support and develop evidence-based policies to facilitate cross-border data sharing in all areas like personal data sharing, but also non-personal data sharing. And we support our members and beyond to roll out consistent policies in that space. So data flow is very much my bread and butter, but even before coming back to Paris, I was actually based here doing a lot on cross-border data flows as well. As project lead at the Asian Business Law Institute, working with a lot of you actually around this room to promote a good conversation on data flows, and then I run the Asia Pacific office of the Future of Privacy Forum, FPF, before relocating to my home country.
Yeah, and so you can see Clarice actually is an old friend and a familiar face on this stage. And today, right, this panel is about the flow of data. It's about contracts and how and why contracts are relevant for the flow of data. Maybe just so that we take a step back, why do we even bother with having to put in contracts? It's because, right, in the countries with general data protection laws, there is a requirement, right? As part of a company, it is your responsibility and your accountability to your customers that when you transfer data to another recipient who is in a different country, you must be assured that the recipient is able to protect the data to the same standard, equivalent standard, comparable standard, adequate standard. They all mean the same thing. There are various ways of doing so. Sometimes we do it at a country level, where two countries get together, we analyze the data, we analyze the system, right? And we are assured that they are of the same standard. Sometimes we use a network of certified companies, like the cross-border privacy rules, where because of the certification, you know that the recipient is able to protect it to a comparable standard. But our discussions with companies tell us that if I remember, and I hope I haven't forgotten so quickly, right? I think almost 70% of companies, when they transfer data across borders, right, they obtain this assurance through contracts, right? So contracts is widely used by companies. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I'm going to just get started, and I'm going to ask, maybe I'll just start with Elaine, right? Now, there was a time where we all had to fashion our own contracts, and then at some point in time, ASEAN got together, and we put up a set of model contractual clauses. So tell us, right, from your experience, how were things like before the ASEAN model contractual clauses were put together?
I think prior to the coming of the ASEAN model contractual clauses onto the scene, it was preceded by a period of time when you rapidly saw many different jurisdictions coming up with their own privacy laws. And in connection with that, then of course there was that magic question around how do we enable data transfers. I think it was the case then, it still continues to be the case that many organizations have in-house standard clauses that they use that have been vetted by their legal or an external firm that hopefully would meet the requirements of whatever data transfers that needed to happen. Of course, that was quickly supplemented by things like the SCCs as well, which came our way as a present from the EU community, of course. The MCCs were a very interesting proposition because it's another tool in the toolbox. It covers ASEAN. So for those of us who have data flows or businesses focusing on the ASEAN region, there were of course questions around how can this be useful to us? So I think what happened before and what happened now, it's largely the same with the addition of this extra tool now that looks potentially useful. And we have questions around how it complements some of the other existing mechanisms like the CBPRs, of course.
Yeah, and I think what we heard, right, in those earlier days was that there's this thing called the SECs floating around.
Yes.
And unless you were familiar dealing with companies that operated or had operations in Europe, right, you have no idea what that is. And you will try to negotiate, you try to change it, right? We'll come to that and why that's a bit of a challenge later, all right? And then there were other situations where everyone came out with their own versions of the contractual clauses, right? So, Kosasi, when the ASEAN model contractual clauses was announced, right? What were you doing?
Okay. I try to remember what I did. But okay, so first I think we really appreciate ASEAN for taking a lead to standardize and try to address the complexity when we do a cross-border data transfer by introducing this MCC. And then I think the purpose of this MCC is really to make sure that the company can comply with the data protection laws and ensure that we fulfill the adequacy principles and as well when we do the data transfer. And also we want to give trust also to our customer to make sure that, hey, we in line with the international standard, with the standard that we adopt in this region to give trust to our customer as well. However, when we try to implement this, I think there are some challenges, especially when we try to deal with the internal team to make sure that before we use this MCC as a toolkit, we should really understand the basic concept first. Data controller, data processor, what is personal data, what is not personal data. So these basic principles, I think, should really, we should introduce internally to make sure that people also understand how to use this useful toolkit when they do a cross-border data transfer. So we as a GoTo as a company, when ASEAN introduced this MCC, we try to adopt this MCC as well. So previously, maybe the same thing happened with other companies. We only have like one template for everything, like data protection clauses that we just put in all of our contracts. But when we see the ASEAN MCC, okay, now we realize there may be two concepts, controller to control transfer and control to processor transfer. So we really need to differentiate this to make sure that we use the right clauses in our contracts. Because for different use cases, we might use different contracts, different templates as well, right? So maybe one of the simplest use case is, for example, when we're dealing with vendors, we share our data with vendors, then they process data based on our instruction. Then we use a control processor contract, right, the template. It's very straightforward, but it's getting more complicated when we try to implement or try to embed this MCC in like a business collaboration with our partners. Because sometimes we transfer the data to them and they also share some data to us, then probably we got some insights from the data that we combine with our partners as well. So this kind of challenges, I think we still need to try to encounter, and it really different between one company to another and one partnership to another. So yes, we try to adopt the MCC in our company to try to make sure that we in line with the standards in the region. But I think at the same time, there are still some other challenges that we still need to encounter and to make sure that we use the MCC properly.
Yeah, thanks, Kosasi. And I think you put your finger on it, right? For many of us operating in this part of the world, data protection is a fairly new concept. Even in Singapore, we've only had it for about 10 years, right? We heard Minister mention that our neighbors, Indonesia and Thailand recently, and I think we could add to the list Vietnam, recently promulgated their laws. So the understanding of these concepts are different. What is personal data? What is a data controller? What is a data processor? Now, one trick is this. When you want to ask the question, what is personal data? Never ask it in the abstract. Look at the documents in front of you. Look at the database in front of you, the Excel sheet in front of you, that collection of information in front of you, and ask yourself, do I have information in there that I can use to identify an individual person? If the answer is yes, likely to be personal data, right? And I think Kosasi has shared, right? GoTo is the data controller because it has collected this data and it is able to decide how to process it. GoTo uses an outsourced vendor who will process and work on those data on the instructions of GoTo. So in this kind of situation, data controller, data processor. You mentioned that you also have business partnership, controller to controller. Can you give us a few examples from your experience, what kind of commercial relationship would qualify as a controller to controller sharing?
Yeah, so one of the use cases is probably when we try to provide a seamless journey for our customer, right? So, and we're partnering with several partners, and probably with one of our partners, we want to onboard them to two platforms at the same time using one onboarding method, and then they can onboard it to two platforms, right? So meaning we're collecting the data together, then we share the data with our partners, but we will use it for different purposes. We will use it for our purposes, and they also use it for their own purposes. And even for this kind of use cases, sometimes there's a thin line to separate between data sharing between controller to controller and also joint controller. So even to add more complexity, the concept of joint controller as well sometimes might confuse people as well. So this is one of the use cases, but we also need to discuss, I think, in details with our team, with the product team, with the business team, to understand how they use the data and how they do the deal with the partners as well, because it also determines like, okay, are we collecting the data for one single purpose as a joint controller, as a joint program, or we try to collect the data and then use it for our own purposes, which probably go to the controller data sharing.
Yeah, so very good examples, anchoring the concepts into actual business relationships and commercial arrangements, what a controller-processor relationship looks like, what a controller-to-controller relationship look like. Now, Elaine, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question.
Sure.
Because in your organization, your footprint is fairly broad, right? And within your organization, just intra-group, you need to share data as well between different companies. How do you manage that?
I presume you're asking me to put on the group DPO hat here. Well, from that perspective, it starts by characterizing the data relationship as well. This is pretty standard with an MNC. There will be a HQ, and then there are subsequent business units that are arranged below that. When we share data to HQ, is that a data controller relationship? Is there a data processing relationship? There has got to be some negotiation there. And there are, of course, strategic considerations, right? Because, for example, if you decide that your HQ is going to act as the processor to all to all of your subsidiaries, because it holds the main systems like your 0365 contracts, then that would have certain repercussions. If you were to flip it around and you were to say, well, at the HQ level, we are co-controllers or we are separate and independent controllers, again, downstream, how you structure the consents or your data collections is going to be impacted. So it starts by having an agreement around that. Once there's that agreement, strategically, then we start looking for tools to support that. So do we enter into a group binding corporate rules, for example? Do we enter into a data transfer agreement? And for those organizations that decide that a data transfer agreement might be the way to go, then some of the tools like the SCCs, the MCCs, then comes into play, and we start to study how best they can be integrated and to support existing group transfers.
Thanks, Elaine. And I think you've given us a very good illustration of how even within one group of companies, you might centralize certain functions. I think many of us will know, right? You need to use a common HR system, a common CRM system, right? And every month you need to put up reports to HQ. So in these situations, you will still have to deal with transfers from different companies in your group in different countries of operation. And within that group, these concepts remain relevant. Controller, processor, figure out who's the one doing the work, right? And who's the one giving instructions. The principles are the same. I think Elaine said you can do it in one big giant agreement called a binding corporate rules. It is also a type of contract, or you could just use contracts, right, within your companies. I'm going to turn over to Clarice, right? You've been looking at this area of contracts, facilitating cross-border transfers of data for quite a while. Share with us your experience, first from the vantage point of what you've seen in your prior role in Europe, what you experienced during the years you spent here in Asia, and then maybe I'll ask you the next question after that.
Okay, I'm waiting for that one. Thanks, Zeke, for the question. I must say, I've done other things in my life than looking at contracts for data transfers. It sounds a bit boring when we put it that way, but actually, even before coming, I was looking at the program this morning and I was thinking, wow, coming on with MCCs, SCCs after a session with the cool guys on regulatory sandboxes and AI, it's going to be a bit of an anticlimax, really. Talking about clauses, but really not, because what we're talking about here is really putting the data house in order and helping all the operations, everybody within an organization, big or small, understand what's happening with the data, make sure that it's properly managed, collected, used, managed, shared, so that no disaster happens. There will always be a problem at some point, but at least you can mitigate. Really, this is the spirit behind all the data transfer mechanisms that have been advocated and developed over decades, I would say now. And it's a good thing. It seems a bit boring maybe, but it's a good thing. And the adoption of the MCCs in ASEAN, I can go back with the European perspective after that, if you will, is actually a very positive one, because it's at a policy level. It shows that there is a strong willingness and a shared willingness at the regional level to actually support organization in something which is not easy to do. When there are more and more regulatory risks around, you need regulatory support. And this is what the regulators have done, so it's a good thing. Contracts have been in place for a long time. It all started in Europe, indeed, in the early 2000s. The idea was really to help companies. At the time, we're looking at really small companies, even transfer data across the borders of the European community, which were like, I don't know, 12 countries back in the days or something. So it was really like long ago. And very clearly, the tool was the most successful. Over the years, others were added by the corporate rules, certification, and so on and so forth. Contracts are the most basic legal instruments you use in an organization. They are an identified legal object. All around the world, there are contracts. It's the most flexible thing you can use to talk to all your partners internally or externally. So hence the success of the tool, I think. Now the models have grown in sophistication as the technology grew in sophistication, and corporate organizations grew into in complexity as well. It's a bit overwhelming sometimes. You're not really sure where you fit. Like now there are 4 sets of European clauses. Some of them I'm not really sure how they're used, to be honest. But they're there, they seem to serve a purpose. What strikes me really is the interest that the ASEAN situation has been attracting over the years. Like there is now a strong cooperation between the EU, which has been really the epicenter of policy making and transfers for decades, and ASEAN, which is a wonderful thing. And now we have to translate this policy initiative into something that works in practice. That's probably the next phase. Really, it is important to invest time and effort at policy level, hopefully also at company level, to make sure that this model contractual clauses work well. And I'd be very interested to get regular feedback on company feedback on the use of the tool, because that's something which will feed into this policy cycle, a wheel we call it, to ingest some information into policy making, also at the OECD level, feed that into reports that will be used themselves to go back into national policy. So it's a really important experiment to me.
Yeah, and Elaine, you wanted to add something?
Yes. Can I just say something cheeky?
Yeah, please.
I mean, we've heard the word help and support a lot today, I think. And I think we hear it a lot from regulators as well. But from the practitioner's perspective, sometimes we get a lot of help. You've got the SEC help, you've got the MCC help, you've got the CBPR help, and now you've also got the China SEC help, and you've got a couple more help coming along the way. At the heart of it, data transfers are about trust, right? If it's trusted, the flow goes. If it's not trusted, it gets jammed. And how do we support that? And how do we make some of the tools that we have in the toolbox a little bit more interoperable? I just wonder whether there were any views on, this side of the table.
Yeah, we'll get there. But you see, one of the things that you've touched on, and I think what Clarice started with, is really the role of these contracts, right? I like the way Clarice put it. It is putting your internal data house in order. Remember, that's the point of these contracts to begin with, is to make sure that whoever that you transfer data to is able to protect it to the same degree, right? So you need to have assurance that your data house is in order. The contracts just give you the legal obligations, but what exactly do you do, right? What help do you have to implement these? And this is where I like to point out that in ASEAN, the model contractual clauses don't sit on their own. they sit on top of the digital data management framework. And that's a framework that essentially tells you, right, and guides you. How do you put your internal governance structure in place? How do you look at data, identify the level of risk and sensitivity so that you're able to then implement the correct technical and process measures to secure them, right? And I think this is going to be necessary, right, for us to be able to put our data house in order. Now, I know that in ASEAN, we've got these two pieces of tools in our toolkit, right? And maybe this is when I'll turn to Denise, right? And basically, kind of like pass Elaine's question to you, right? What does PDPC think, right? How can PDPC help?
Sorry, Denise.
No problem. I think it's important for us to take a step back and look at this from a sort of national and policy level. I mean, the data transfer landscape today is fragmented. At the last count, there are 137 countries with data protection laws, and it's a huge increase in the last decade. I mean, even within ASEAN, and we have all our ASEAN colleagues here today, the regulatory landscape is at different stages of development. There are some countries who have data protection laws for quite a while now and established data protection authorities. As has been mentioned, there are a few countries that have just put in place data protection laws and are in the process of setting up authorities. And there are others who not yet have data protection horizontal laws and are relying on sectorial regulation. But regardless, I think most data protection laws do have some sort of data transfer requirement, as you've mentioned, to protect the data to an equivalent standard once it leaves the geographical boundary. And the data transfer mechanisms have been there's some convergence around that for a while now. Contractual clauses, I think, have wound up being one of the most effective and efficient ways of doing that for the businesses in this room, and I think the industry here agrees. So we're starting to see more and more countries and more regions promoting the use of contractual clauses. EU, as has been mentioned, in the SCCs, but also the Ibero-American Network, I think, is working on that. And then within ASEAN, of course, we have the MCCs. But you will have to understand the MCCs against that background of ASEAN that I just described. So they are voluntary, they are a flexible template, they are really meant to be help, and it's meant to be help particularly in the landscape and context of varying levels of maturity. As Zeke has said, they were based on both data protection principles of ASEAN, but also on the back of the data management framework, which provides technical and clear requirements and guidance as to what you can do to get your data house in order. So for countries like Singapore, Philippines, where we have established data protection regulators, we have also issued regulatory guidance to say that companies using the MCCs will have been considered to have met the transfer limitation obligation. And that is meant to create more certainty, create less confusion, and foster regulatory convergence. And that is the help that we're trying to provide at the national level and also at the regional level.
Can I pick that one up and challenge it a little bit, though?
Sure.
So there have been instances, I think, where we tried to propose the MCCs to a counterparty in ASEAN. To us, it was no-brainer, right? It covers ASEAN, you're in ASEAN, I'm ASEAN, how about we use it? But you encounter friction in the sense that the counterparty may not particularly be familiar with the MCCs or have clearance to use the MCCs within their existing organizational contractual clauses. And so something that is meant to be helpful, which I do think potentially is very helpful, could not actually come to fruition. Is there anything that we can do to try and lubricate that process? Because to me, it seems like we need to get the word out about the MCC a lot more, educate on how it's used, and then make it a default go-to, if that's the intention, for those scenarios that MCC is intended to address, and for those scenarios which the MCC is not equipped to address, again, to make that better understood so we know when not to touch it.
Yeah, and I think you put your finger on it, right? The MCCs have been around for, I think, 4 years, 5 years, 4 years-ish, right? And it hasn't been around for as long as some other contractual clauses.
Yep.
Awareness is one, right? I think apart from what Denise has mentioned, that the regulator can give their stamp of approval and endorsement. Apart from that, right? Of course, we also have at ASEAN, the ministerial level, they've endorsed it. The regulators can endorse it, but these are essentially government endorsement. A lot needs to be done to educate, right? And to make sure that businesses become familiar with this set of contractual clauses. Now, Kosasi, I'm going to throw the question to you. You tried using it, right? Share with us one or two things that you did, right, to convince your other business partner or your service provider that you should take a serious look at the MCCs. How did you go about convincing them?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, right? Because Clarice mentioned that contract is probably one of the most flexible tools, but at the same time, we try to standardize using like not using it strictly, it's voluntary definitely, but we try to standardize. But I think we as a company, we're dealing with a lot of partners, so definitely it will create a headache for our legal team if we need to dealing with a lot of different templates. So try to explain to our counterparts or to our partners that, hey, we come up with this draft and we're using this draft, or we adopt this draft from the templates that is recognized in the region. I think it's quite helpful to start the discussion to make sure that the negotiation can be maybe smooth, or maybe like we're not dragging our counterpart to like a very nonsense negotiation, right? So they know where we are coming from, they know why we're using the standard. Of course, we're not using the standards plainly. We make some adjustment because different partnership, different business might require some slight adjustment as well. But I think it really helps to start the negotiation when we talk with our partners as well. And also in our group, it's not everything is a very strategic partnership, right? So we have a very straightforward business use case as well for our small companies as well in our groups as well. So also that is a really time saver for the legal team in that small company, for SMEs, to use this kind of toolkit so they don't confuse or try to seek maybe like a very expensive legal advice, try to draft a very sophisticated language when they are a very maybe SMEs or with maybe a small business, right? So that can be really helpful for the company as well to save time, save money as well.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps could be the winning argument, right? It is a set of, never mind the government has endorsed it, never mind the regulators have endorsed it, right? If it is simple enough to be read and easy enough to understand, and if it's going to save time, and you're going to be able to sign that deal sooner and get that contract signed sooner so that you can get on with business, I think that's sometimes the best and the winning arguments. Clarice, you want to comment on what Kosasi and Elaine have said?
Yeah, I really wanted to pick up on what Kosasi just said. It's true. Contracts in principle are flexible, and we have to make sure that we keep that flexibility while enjoying the benefits of some standardization. I think that's really key, and particularly in ASEAN, as Denise was saying, the landscape being what it is important not to make things inflexible. Otherwise, it's just exactly the opposite of what this exercise aims to achieve. In other words, not making the clauses mandatory, not forcing the filing of annexes, not forcing a variety of translations in different languages. All these things make life more complicated, and that's something which has been learned through the long history of the EU clauses, but also in other regions. Indeed, well, Latin America is different, but also in the Middle East, in New Zealand, everybody has its own set of clauses, and I think the temptation exists to make it, quite, compelling, so that we know as regulators, me counting myself as one in a way, speaking here, we actually achieve stability, but actually we might do exactly the opposite of what is needed, which is to build some flexibility in consistency. Yeah, that's really something I wanted to flesh out, because legal certainty is what we're looking for here. Yes. And actually making things inflexible creates legal uncertainty. So that would be totally counterproductive.
Now, Denise has mentioned that in ASEAN, we've got a spectrum, right? I think I think I'm losing count, but 5 or maybe 6 countries with data protection laws, the rest in various stages of enacting them, relying on sectoral regulation. There's a spectrum. Kosasi's experience is that because in this region, data protection as a concept is so new, fundamental concepts like what is personal data, what is a data controller, who is a data processor, new concepts, right? Hence, something simple, easy to understand, is easier to use and easier to adopt. And of course, we've heard the standard contractual clauses from Europe, right? Now, they've been doing it since 1970s. Now, depending on who I speak to, with Clarice on the panel, France passed the first data protection law in 1978.
Yeah.
But if I'm sitting next to a German chap, they claim to have passed the first data protection law, also in 1970s. But never mind.
Not at the federal level.
Yeah, not at, yeah. you see a bit of that European rivalry. But 1970s to today, 50 years, right? 50 years tradition of data protection. Things have become much more mature. Their standard contractual clauses are much more comprehensive because they have a much more mature system, and a lot of people already know what personal data is, and they know who the controller and who the processor is. So when we have to do business between ASEAN and the EU, there will be some challenges. Now, Denise, you recently flew up to Brussels, right? Launched one of the recent initiatives for international cooperation between ASEAN and the EU. It is a guide that tries to map, right, the ASEAN contractual clauses and the European contractual clauses. So Denise, share with us why did PDPC start with this, and what does PDPC hope to achieve with this, right? And how can PDPC help, right, get something going between ASEAN and the EU?
Thanks for the question. ASEAN and EU have a very strong economic relationship. The trade volume is something like 200 billion euros. And so it was very important for us to build and to solidify and to create certainty for data flows between the two regions. And in order to facilitate that, we worked with the EU to promote mutual understanding as the basis of the EU and ASEAN contractual data clauses. The joint guide is a result of that collaboration between ASEAN and the European Commission Directorate General of Justice and Consumers, or DigiJust. And it builds on the ASEAN framework on digital data governance and the ASEAN MCCs. Now, the guide highlights the similarities and the differences between both sets of clauses, and the aim is to facilitate common understanding and to ease contractual negotiations, because understanding the differences will be the basis of any contractual negotiation. And we believe that this will help to level the playing field, especially for small and medium enterprises who may not have the legal resources to understand the differences otherwise because of resource constraints. But that is only at the sort of contractual, the theoretical level in a way. So what we are hoping to provide is further guidance on the practical aspects. Having identified the differences, we then hope to put in place what we call part 2, which is the best practices and safeguards, the actual technical and operational requirements that businesses can readily implement. And that is really the key part. And we're working very closely with our European counterparts in order to have that put together and published very soon. We hope that if we do that, working closely with our EU partners, we are able to facilitate understanding and contractual negotiations as well as actual business, while still sort of preserving and understanding each other's unique cultural and social norms.
Yeah, and I think that's brings it down, right, really to what we need to do to put our data house in order. What are the actual technical requirements that we need to implement to say that if I did this, for example, if I had a consent register that's able to keep track of consent, I'm good for both set of clauses. If I've implemented SSL for transmission, I'm good, I'm okay for both sets of clauses. It brings it down to that level, right? And that's the kind of work that we can find in the ASEAN data management framework. And now we're going to be using that as a basis to build on this second leg of that collaboration between ASEAN and the EU. And here I want to just turn to some of the questions, right, that I've received in Pigeonhole. This one, I think, is particularly relevant. The question is, how do you ensure that your transfer template is relevant across the different countries' requirements, right? And I think this comes from someone who has to manage cross-border compliance, multiple countries, and maybe each one with a slightly different set of requirements. I'm going to, well, Kosasi was smiling so broadly, I have to invite you to take a first step at, you've gone through this pain before, so tell us, right? Share with us what have you, what is your experience and what did you do?
Yeah, first of all, maybe it's quite challenging to create one template that can be applicable to all jurisdictions. There's no one size fits all. But maybe what you can do is to create the baseline. Then if needed, then when you want to implement to some countries, then you can have some clauses that is optional or maybe can be applicable when we're dealing with the specific jurisdictions. Yeah. Because I know we have ASEAN MCC, we have SCC, but still I think to make sure that we really comply with the local laws, it's quite challenging and needs some adjustment as well. So what we do is we have the standard contract, we have the standard template, but we also have some notes that maybe explain to whoever use the templates, it's either legal team or the DPO teams, that hey, you make sure that you pay attention for these specific clauses when you're dealing with the partners from this jurisdiction, for example. Yeah, so that's what we do. We're not trying to force everyone to use the single template for all jurisdiction, but what we do is we create the standard template with some notes or maybe a specific provision that's only applicable for some jurisdictions.
Elaine, what are your experience?
I would start slightly differently. I would start with the question of risk. So look at your markets. Where are your main data transfers going? If it's Europe, there is a pretty obvious starting point. And then if it's ASEAN, there is another one. If you're China focused, there's yet another one. So from there, you would then look in the toolbox and try to figure out which transfer mechanism or standard contractual clauses makes the most sense for your particular organization. And then having determined that base, consider next where the outliers are, start grouping them, and then develop, I guess, as Kosasi has mentioned, the add-ons to supplement where your base template may not necessarily have covered the risk appropriately. So very much aligned to what Kosasi said, except with the caveat that I would start first by considering the risk profile of the organization as a whole.
And I think putting both together, you essentially have a risk-based approach.
Yes.
You understand where the greatest areas of risk are. Pay a bit more attention. If you have those notes in your contract, you will make sure that you check, right? And if it's a lower risk, then maybe you check a little later, not immediately. Or maybe you have different...
We're not admitting to anything of that sort. But you know, as Denise has pointed out, you've got 100 plus regulations across the world, right? So if you try to do a country by country compliance, then your DPO would probably check into Bedlam sooner rather than later. So for our sanity, at some point, it really becomes a question about risk, profiling, grouping, and then actioning based on that assessment.
Yep. Clarice, anything to add to this? Because you spent a few years looking at these issues across Asia. Share some words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom. Well, I was delighted to see the law adopted in Indonesia. I'm very happy to see that there is now a decree in Vietnam. We're still waiting for India, unfortunately, but I mean, things have been moving and much faster sometimes than had been hoped, so it's a very positive development. But that said, fragmentation remains and it is inevitable. It is a fact of life. No country will be exactly similar to the other. We'll always have differences. That's the price to pay to go regional or global, I guess. The question is, how do regulators, governments actually accompany companies, organizations as they go regional and global in an environment which is still a bit, not shaky, but not so easy to navigate. Maybe I'll just pick up very quickly on something which Elaine just said, going beyond the clauses. It's so important to enable companies to have access to a toolkit, a toolbox, and to not limit them and not force them to use one single tool each time. It's the only way out, really, to survive in this global jungle. It's very hard. We did a really interesting report at the OECD that was published in April this year, and where we'd actually surveyed practitioners all around the globe, particularly in Asia-Pac, and asking them what were the biggest challenges to implementing data transfer regulations in their respective jurisdictions and regionally. And really the first thing that came back is, we need diversity. Don't force us, don't channel us into one single tool. We need certainty. When you give us a tool, when you put forward a solution, let it really be a solution and not be a problem pretending to solve a problem. I mean, we have a number of lessons learned in this report. I would really be grateful if you could, have a look and provide feedback. As ASEAN develops and matures and is actually much more advanced than you might think in many respects, I think it's very important to keep diversity in mind for sure.
Well, yeah, I want to pick up that as maybe the last topic for our discussion. Every regulator is trying to help. Everyone recognizes that contractual clauses are useful, and they recognize that it's widely depended on. And we've got one set in ASEAN. We've heard about the European set. Denise mentioned the Ibero-America. They've got another set. And these are the regional contractual clauses. And then you have the country ones. China has issued one, UK has issued one, right? I'm hoping that in ASEAN we just stick to the ASEAN one, right? We've so many, right? How do we navigate, right? How do we figure out which ones to use, and how do we ensure that if you are dealing with a company, right, from two different regions, how do you bridge that? And that actually maps, right, to one of the questions, that's come up, right? With so many contractual clauses, Singapore companies often find themselves forced to agree to them. And that really depends on whether you are, you run the business or you are the one buying the service, right? So you're forced to agree to them. So maybe I'll use this as the roundup question, right? Starting with Kosasi. When you are faced with a situation in law school, when I was a young boy, it was called the battle of forms, right? You waive your ASEAN model contractual clause, your business partner waives maybe the Iberico-American ones, and how do you resolve a situation like that?
Yeah, so usually we will go back to our initial goal is to gain trust from our customer. Then probably when we're facing with a lot of contracts, a lot of templates, then we need to ask ourselves maybe which clauses that can maybe boost the trust or enhance the trust from our customer, because ultimately we want to make sure, want to respect their privacy to get their trust as well. So it's important to see or maybe to understand it's not only using the clauses, but which clauses or maybe which templates that can give confidence to us as a company when we're processing and collecting data, but at the same time we maintain the trust from our customer to make sure that we're not losing a customer as well, and also we make sure that our business is sustainable.
So you've given a model answer, right? Because you've gone right back to the whole rationale, the raison d'etre of why do we even have these contractual clauses. It is to ensure accountability. And to whom are we accountable? Yep. Our customers, right? Yep. They should be the front and center, and they should be our North Star in a sense. Trust with the customers, the North Star, to help us navigate these kind of issues. And underpinning your answer is the fact that we need a bit of flexibility, because in situations like this, you might need to make some changes to the clauses. Elaine?
Sorry, if I add one more thing, and also with clauses that is reasonable for the company, because there's no point picking the most strict template, but we know in reality we cannot perform that as well. So I think that's also quite important.
Yeah, absolutely right? Make promises that you can keep.
Yeah.
Elaine?
I'm not sure how many of you remember the 6 stages of grief that the Singapore community encountered when the STCs visit our shore. There was obviously denial. What do you mean this can't be negotiated? And then eventually we got to a state of acceptance. And today it is, it's something that shouldn't be terribly difficult to get agreement on, because the baselines are agreed on. When we talk about all these competing contracts that are coming up, I think one reason why many companies struggle with it is because the baselines are not agreed on yet. So to the extent that they're not agreed on, then the impetus is on the negotiator to try to find that common ground, right? So someone proposes to you, let's use the standard clauses. But if there's something that makes more sense, that covers more of your data flows, from a cost efficiency perspective, there's no reason why you cannot suggest that replace the proposed clauses. The other things that I would suggest are thinking outside the box. Rather than just thinking about contracts on their own, also think about your other toolkits, right? Can we, for example, redirect the data flow so that this stops being a problem to begin with? Can I perhaps lean on some of the consents that I've gotten at the start of the data flow process, so that I don't necessarily have to lean so heavily on the standard clauses that are causing me grief? So ultimately, it becomes a dance around some of these primary concerns and jigging the bits of the jigsaw puzzle until you find the most balanced way of getting that particular transaction through.
Yeah, and I think great pointers, right? So essentially, as the data protection officer, you need to work very closely with your business partners and your technical partners, right? Sometimes, and basically, you can only do all these things if you have got your data house in order.
Yes.
You know what your contract, what your consent clauses allow you to do. Yes. You know the flow, You can map your flow. You know how to reroute where you have to. That close partnership, working together with your colleagues to find those practical solutions, which will then help you with your negotiations.
And as a final point, I will leave off by just saying that exactly is where conversation with fellow industry practitioners becomes really important. It's important to engage with your fellow community so that industry baseline and best practice becomes more consolidated as we go along.
Building
Trust.
industry practices.
That's right.
And on that point, I turn to Denise, right? What do you think a regulator can do beyond what you're already doing with the EU-ASEAN guide?
I think as model contractual clauses gain traction around the world, there is potential to build as many bridges as we can. I wish there was a silver bullet, but there isn't. A global set of clauses, of course, would make everyone's life easier, but we're nowhere near that yet, on the most optimistic of views. But what we can do is to try and find practical common ground, to try and find convergence, and to draw as many baselines as we can, and try and bring those together, and that enhances common understanding and then allows easier negotiation on a business-to-business basis. We're certainly going to try and pursue that as best as we can in order to facilitate data flows.
Well, you've heard it, right, from the regulator. Even though DPOs are hard at work navigating and working, regulators and policymakers, they are doing the same thing as well, right, at a G2G level. Clarice, you have the last word.
Well, the time of policymakers is not the time of business. We all know that. So, policymakers can always be criticized for coming after the facts and, not picking things up quickly enough, maybe. What I really see from my OECD window, and after so many years here and before that in Europe only, I can say that safely there is a strong willingness of the policy community to support businesses in something which is acknowledged as one of the major challenges for compliance with data protection laws nowadays. So, from where we are, I think we're very happy to help as much as we can.
And the OECD performs a very important function in convening policymakers to have those conversations and those discussions that are necessary to achieve convergence. Now, I thank you all for your attention, and for those few chaps who could have gone off for an early lunch, who stayed behind, thank you for staying behind. I hope the rest of you with businesses and service providers, business partners in the region have found the sharing from this panel helpful to understand, and also picked up a few tips and tricks, right, of how to manage and your transfers and get your data house in order. May I invite you to help me thank my panelists for spending the morning with us, and also give yourselves a great clap on the back, right, for staying on for this second panel. Thank you.